Deshaun Foster and UCLA rounding out their 2025 commits. And how can this new commit potentially help them get a top uncommitted quarterback in the 2026 class?
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. It's your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Where we get started today is UCLA has now what is looking like their 19th commit here for the 2025 class. UCLA already has a pretty stacked transfer class, bringing in with quarterbacks, receivers, all sorts of reinforcements from the high school prep level and the college transfer level. Now, what is UCLA going to do with that? Well, the latest is Shane Rosenthal, technically a 3-star commit coming out of Newberry Park, had a very prolific career with a team that was very good this last season if you kept a real good tabs on the SoCal high school football circuit. If you look beyond just the St. John Boscos and the modern days of the world, and you're like, hey, well, this is Rosenthal coming to UCLA. This is what he had to say on the 24/7 sports site, quoting about why he went to UCLA, why he chose UCLA. This is important, and this is why UCLA can still win over recruits now into the future. And whenever this pay-for-play model truly comes in, as we have this hybrid version of it with NIL, this is how UCLA can work. One of the first quotes, the visit went great, and I really enjoyed meeting the staff and getting the chance to see where I fit in. Okay. I think these visits are probably going a lot better than they would have gone with Chip Kelly. So that's always one great check for Deshaun Foster and his recruiting staff. They get it. They understand it. 2, one of the most important quotes he had to say in this article: UCLA has always been a school I dreamed of attending. Insert quote, copy and paste. There's kids like that out there. There are players, there are high school students who are sitting there and have that on their mind when they're deciding any sport that UCLA, right? There's a lot of schools and a lot of players that, okay, this is my dream destination. But how many of those players are UCLA missing when they got guys like a Shane Rosenthal who comes in and has a quote like that? Has always been a school I dreamed of attending. Now, there's always chances that these players, these high school kids, could be gaslighting all of us, but it's more common than you think that UCLA is a fan favorite for many players. Don't let the USC nonsense. No, people want to go to UCLA. And one of the things he talks about was he knew it was a perfect fit after his visiting with this quote. Coaching staff really impressed me. And then there's a family atmosphere. And another quote, academics have always been a top priority for me, and UCLA status as the #1 public university sealed the deal. Awesome. How about the being close to home part? Cool. There's kids who want to play top-tier football on the West Coast, close to home. And, oh, by the way, UCLA is a good school too, even though we forget that it's a pay-for-play era. All right, cool. What does he bring to the football field? This is a guy who was initially committed to Princeton, so obviously the grades are there, had potentials with Cal. I wonder who used to be the receiver coach at Cal, Burl Toller III. Oh, bring him over the West Coast, Washington in recent weeks. So depending on how this was all battling, UCLA apparently last couple of weeks brought in a full ride and sent it to this kid to bring him over. And after the full contact period was available, UCLA brought this kid in. And now with their 2025 commits, they have a total of 18 signed, 1 hard commit right now with Rosenthal because he can't officially sign. So that's 39 new players coming to UCLA in the 2025 class. Of course, in my mind, you're headlined by Joey Aguilar, the new quarterback who is supposed to be, in my mind, the clear-cut starter coming from App State. You bring in a big-time transfer receiver, his running mate at App State in Caden Robinson. One of the later recruits UCLA has was a running back in Anthony Woods. You mix in some linemen, you mix in some pieces, and UCLA hopefully is developing with the staff and the overhaul mixing in new coaches, old good coaches, and new pieces, and that can lead to a building season turning into a bowl campaign and hopefully 7 to 8 wins in this 2025 schedule. With Rosenthal, what can he bring in? He's the nation's 98th rated receiver. He's a top 60 product in all of California. And in this last year in high school, 84 catches, 1,500 yards, 24 touchdowns in the season, not just career-wise. Some receivers had those numbers as a career high school number. For a Southern Section Division II champion in CIF Newbury Park, had this kid in 15 games, 24 touchdowns, 1,500 yards, 84 receptions. That sounds like top target material. The idea of what he can be pinned as from myself, also what this article from Blair and Dulos says, and you'll see what Greg Biggins says too, this is somewhat of Logan Loya 2.0. UCLA lost that slot receiver. Now, yes, you had Rico Flores, who was supposed to start over Logan Loya. He was number one on the depth chart, got hurt, never truly found his footing, and health-wise was never on the field, and Logan Loya played a lot, even though his roles and his numbers were way down and then eventually transferred out after being UCLA for forever. Now, I could think Rico Flores could be that guy who could start in that spot, but Deshaun Foster, remember, said at the end of the season, he's hurt, he had a setback, he's not going to be back till maybe fall camp. So the Bruins still need that slot guy. So maybe Rosenthal starts, maybe he doesn't. But remember, Rico Flores is not supposed to be ready and healthy from the beginning of fall camp, maybe even week 1, week 2. That's if he gets better over the spring and the summer. Still a lot of time in between now and then, depending on how devastating that setback was with what Deshaun Foster said at the end of the season. So Rosenthal comes in over 4 seasons, had 5,000 yards and 62 touchdowns. And, Logan Loya 2.0, this is what Greg Biggins had to say about Rosenthal. At the Under Armour next All-American camp, dominant as any receiver, elite quickness off the line, ton of wiggle in the route, and would get separation down the field, 5'10 and a half, $180, good 10-yard burst, good 40, 4.5. And this is what Greg Biggins had to say about this kid. Arguably the most under-recruited player in the state and easily has Power 4 potential. That's high praise considering you look at all these players. You could look and say the same thing about the 2s and the 3s on the modern day rosters, the St. John Bosco, any player in the Trinity League mostly. Some of these you go up north in NorCal. There's many teams where the 2s and the 3s, the backups for these super Catholic schools or the top tier publics like a Corona Centennial get under-recruited. But no, you're giving this kid this amount of hype, local SoCal kid who was initially going to go Ivy League. And mind you, the Ivy League's not going to go play in the FCS playoffs like they weren't prior. Bring this kid west. And these are the types of kids you want to keep at home. Underrated, under-recruited, kids that are under the radar that aren't necessarily looking. I'm not going to speak because I don't specifically know, but he said he wants academics too. He's not looking for, hey, hand me the bag. Give me the bag, and then I'll come to your university now that more people have eyes on me. No, the kid that's in your backyard that wants to go to UCLA already has the grades and is a good football player. There are so many players out there like this, and UCLA should more often hit on them than not. Takes a little recruiting. Sorry, Chip. Sorry you didn't really want to do this. Although he did it decently in the portal, Deshaun Foster and company should try and hit on these guys over and over again. And what is the connection from Shane Rosenthal and Newbury Park? Oh, maybe there's a quarterback UCLA might go after. Dare I say Brady Smigiel and the Rosenthal connection could be something in the mix for the 2026 quarterback. That's one of the top 2 uncommitted quarterback prospects left in the 26 cycle. We'll talk about next when they got a steal and a late commit for signing day in 2025 and how that can help them for 2026. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. You can predict the first touchdown, who's going to win the MVP of the game, or even bet on the coin toss. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action, and you have live betting all game long, so you can even adjust your bets as the game unfolds. You can have thrill from the opening kickoff until the final whistle. The live betting feature keeps you involved no matter what, and with the app super easy to navigate, Place a $5 bet. You could potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. That's icing on the cake. Download the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5. If you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, here we go. Segment 2. So UCLA gets another commit. You can dare say a late commit in the 25 recruiting cycle now that the coaches can go contact. UCLA had initially been going after some Florida kids, been offering some top-tier recruits out of Colorado. Brady Smigiel was a name that UCLA has possibly on their radar. He is the second best quarterback in the 2026 cycle that is currently uncommitted. Now, that changes every day with players committing, decommitting, flipping. But now that a West Coast kid has decommitted from Florida State, UCLA is going to be in a battle with a lot of these Big Ten rivals that they now have in recruiting wars, whether it be NIL or just keeping a kid or two local. All right. So I was looking at Adam Gorney, who is the national recruiting director for Rivals. This is what he had to say about some of the teams that might be in on UCLA, all right? Or the guys that Brady Smigiel might have in on his radar now that he's decommitted from Florida State. And you think about Florida State, man, they've gone downhill. They were 1 year, a snub and an injury, and then a snub away from making it to the CFP, the 4-team CFP. And then they had 10 decommits from the 2025 class. You have one of the best QB prospects leaving your class for 2026, and they're really going downhill right now. Now, you wonder what's happening with Florida. You're wondering what's happening with all these other schools in the state of Florida. Maybe UCLA can start and recruit across the country. But until then, UCLA can get their hands on one of the most coveted prospects. And I know you might tell me, hey, UCLA's got way too many quarterbacks to sort out after Aguilar leaves because he's got 1 year of eligibility this next year in 2025. I know they got a lot of players, but there's someone in your own backyard, and maybe the connection between Rosenthal and Smigiel, you think with the dad being the head football coach there in high school, you wonder, hey, maybe one kid has a good year. You have Rosenthal has a good year, good relationship, and maybe NIL is not a big thing. Maybe it's who's going to develop the quarterback the best, who has got the best option, who can keep him closer to home. UCLA offers all those things, and they also have an early year-long recruiting process leading up to signing day by having one of the best receiving targets that Smigiel has had his high school career going a year earlier with Rosenthal. Now, I'm not going to speak on high school friendship. I don't know how closely connected these guys are or not, but you expect, based on the numbers they continually put up on the gridiron, hey, UCLA might have an in that aspect. Now, are they going to win any NIL battle? Are they going to have to deal with old friends or, dare I say, enemies? Chip Kelly recruiting in person. I think you're going to see on the Locked On Big Ten Squad episode, picks or it didn't happen. Well, Chip Kelly in-person recruiting in Southern California, yeah, it apparently exists. Never in a UCLA uniform. And he's a part of the Ohio State recruiting platform trying to bring Smigiel to Ohio State. And then you got Michigan, who after last year, they want all sorts of quarterbacks to fill up the depth chart because none of them were good in 2024. Hey, Washington, they're going to keep their eyes on a guy like this who could sit for a year and after their quarterback grows, could have somebody in on the mix. But now UCLA, hey, maybe one last second change in 2026 could completely revamp the quarterback room from a super senior into a freshman. All right. So now UCLA is sitting here like, all right, now this kid is going to change his mind. You bring in Smigiel. And this is what Greg Biggins had talked about. I was reading what he had to say about Smigiel, the 6'5", 205-pound quarterback, 4-star, 5-star recruit, depending on what metrics you use. One of the 5 best quarterbacks in the country, one of the top 10 prospects out of the state of California. He is a big, strong pocket passer who has put up big numbers since his freshman year of high school. At the most recent camp showing, he had a lot of very accurate throws, a tight release, and he's accurate down the field, knowing how to drop it over the top of the defense and put on some velo when you need to throw it through a tight window and beat some of the DBs. Great natural leader, locker room guy and teammate, very high football IQ. Dad is his coach, so he knows and how to be around the game and has a good natural feel for playing the position. At Newberry Park, was a recent CIF champion, trying to run it back there in 2026 or 2025, heading into his graduation year of 2026. And that's what Greg Biggins said earlier, similar to Daniel Jones. And don't really get bent out of shape because Daniel Jones' NFL career has kind of fallen by the wayside at this moment. That's still flashes of an NFL quarterback that took his team to the playoff in one of the toughest media markets. So if you got a guy who can come into college and have comparisons to an NFL QB, like every scouting director is going to do, or I'll try and compare, right? You got a Logan Loya 2.0 and Rosenthal. This guy's a little reminding of Daniel Jones, less of a mobile quarterback. He's not going to be a big runner, but Sunday potential and projects as a high major power 4 prospect. Decommitted. He's been unofficially visiting Washington. South Carolina's in on the mix. So if UCLA is going to get into a NIL war, they're not going to win this. Because Michigan, you think about it, they had a donor throw up a huge NIL offer to one of their quarterbacks coming in. Ohio State had the $20 million roster. Washington with Jed Fish, they're going to do whatever it takes. South Carolina, they've got the SEC bag. Even though it's not as solidified as it used to be, they're going to have enough to probably outbid UCLA. But the in potentially with Rosenthal and Smigiel, the local connection as well, could maybe play a factor now that Deshaun Foster's in here. They're one of those 5 schools that were listed by Adam Gorney from Rivals. Now the Bruins just set to go seal the deal. It's a matter of, are they interested? Is Tino Sinceri, after getting a late quarterback flip in the 2025 class, evaluating what he has with the roster that's overfilled in the quarterback room, do you want to go after another quarterback in the 26 class? Well, it's like those NFL rosters that, hey, we've got our quarterback. Think of the Falcons, right? They signed a huge money deal to Kirk Cousins. And then they went after Michael Penix Jr. And who eventually started? Well, they went with Michael Penix Jr. That could happen with UCLA and Joey Aguilar. Maybe something else flies better and throws better by the end of the year. But initially, you're going to go with Aguilar. And then you've got some guys in the quarterback room that could fend for the starting position. But if you got a guy that's super talented, like this pocket passer that stands 6'5", you look at the measurables, all good. You have the coach and everything. That could be a good potential there. So look for UCLA if they want to get into a battle. They're not going to win the NIL war, but they have an in a different way. And this is a quarterback I think you go after and at least give a chance to recruiting if that's where Tino wants to go and Deshaun Foster and his recruiting want to go. If not, they've got so many other quarterbacks on the roster. Let's be real. So many other ones. Why not just take a look at another one? Because if he's available, I say get him. If he's expensive, well, UCLA is not going to win that battle, I think, considering what they have on the depth chart, unless they just decide after this season they want none of those quarterbacks. You need depth, but at some point, if there's too many players, all these other guys are going to leave. The starters, the backups, and the third strings. You see that in the portal all the time. So go check out Brady Smigiel. Good highlight tapes. You're going to see a lot of Shane Rosenthal in those tapes, and you can see 2 high school teammates, one going to UCLA in the 25 class and potential in 2026. Next, we're going to talk UCLA basketball and how some of the wins from previous opponents earlier this season might help their bracketology updates and what they figured out so far heading into the middle of Big Ten play. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get to any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return. You get real life and real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will give you every deduction possible. They'll find them all and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All you got to do is wait, and then you get the most money back guaranteed. No real waiting, no wondering, no worries. And now this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Again, that's TurboTax.com/guarantees. So I was taking a look at the latest bracketology for UCLA and wondering, hey, what is this UCLA team looking like right now, right? Joe Lunardi updates his Tuesdays, right? One of UCLA's worst losses of the year was to North Carolina, and North Carolina just lost to Pitt on the road. So North Carolina, who's one of the last 4 teams in, might not even make the tournament. And that's who UCLA lost to on a neutral site. Mind you, they blew that game, and that was without Eric Daly Jr., a game UCLA just could buy a free throw. But here the Bruins are wondering, hey, how can we improve our standing? How can we be a guarantee, a lock, and go from what Joe Lunardi has them right now, a 7 seed in the Midwest bracket, which is also kind of funny because the Midwest bracket, their regional finals in Indianapolis. And I think Mick Cronin, by the end of the season, for now, is going to be sick of the state of Indiana. You have the Indiana trip mixed with Illinois, got the Purdue trip mixed with Northwestern, and then the Big Ten tournament here in the end of the season for the conference tournament prior to the NCAA tournament. So if UCLA gets placed in the Midwest, goes on a run, they're going to have to go to Indiana 4 times for the end of the season. They still got 3 trips east to the state of Indiana before it's all said and done, which is why it's imperative that UCLA continues to build the resume. The Oregon game is huge. You've got the Michigan State game coming up. Michigan State currently slotting as a 3 seed in the, let me take one look at it. Michigan State slotting as a 3 seed in the East. They'd be playing in Providence. And the more you travel, you see if UCLA gets put in the wrong region, they got to go all the way to the East Coast. Providence, Rhode Island, nowhere close. You'd rather play a first-round game in Denver, at least take the stress off the travel, or play in the West, where you can play in Seattle as a first round, 4 or 5 seed, and then you play in San Francisco, where you're most likely to have a better home crowd showing than if you have to go to Indianapolis, if you have to go to Newark, or you have to go to Atlanta. I'm looking at bracketology right now, and the difference between UCLA being a 7 and a 4, Oregon is currently that top 15, 16 team because they won all those neutral site games in the Players Era NIL tournament that they played in during the Thanksgiving Day week. Well, they're the 4 seed, and Arizona, because Caleb Love hit a half-court buzzer beater, beat Iowa State at home, a number 3 team in the country at the time. They beat them in overtime. Arizona's been red hot since they lost to UCLA, losing once on the road at Texas Tech, and they've beaten a lot of good teams in Big 12 play. They beat West Virginia, who was ranked at one time. A lot of good teams Arizona's taken down. They're now a 5 seed, and UCLA beat them at a neutral court, technically on the road because that game was played in Phoenix. And you can debate whether Arizona was at full strength without their 7-footer Krivas. But the Bruins held them without a field goal for 8+ minutes to end that game. And they scored less than 60 points. Caleb Love wasn't dominating in that game. And UCLA won that game, one of their signature wins. Arizona's rising. That's why we got to cheer for these teams to win. Gonzaga started 0-2 in WCC play. That's not good. They're falling to an 8 seed. They have a lower seeding than UCLA. And then you've got Maryland, who sits as a 7 seed. They'd be playing in Cleveland, but they're in the West. UCLA right now is a 7 seed playing Oklahoma in Cleveland, but they're in the Midwest region. And think about all the travel UCLA has to do. You still got 3 trips east. Would you rather go north or a little east to Denver, which is a short flight for UCLA before a week off, and then a longer flight? Will they be tired with the travel? We have seen UCLA, when they've traveled east, has not gone well. New York, Nebraska, Maryland, and Rutgers, all disasters. Every single one of them. Now you mix in a short trip to Phoenix, you mix in a short, maybe long drive to the Intuit Dome, depending on traffic. Okay, they won those neutral site games and have big wins. And you played in Seattle, they won tough. You played in Los Angeles, you played in the Galen Center, you won that game just the other night. They got to build the resume with even bigger wins because UCLA's more likely in than not, barring a late season slump, which could happen with travel and injuries And we've already seen UCLA collapse when they played 3 of their first 4 games of the new year on the road. I do think with the addition of Aday Mara in the lineup, learning how to play without Tyler Bilodeau will only make them better for when they do have to play with Tyler Bilodeau. But you also have to cheer for all these other teams UCLA's beaten, like the Arizonas. I don't want to say it, but you got to. Caleb Love's half-court buzzer beater is going to be one of those things where it helps Arizona, and every team will beat Arizona, especially UCLA. Oh, man, Arizona's going to jump into a 3 or 4. How's the Oregon game important? Oregon and Arizona are 4 or 5 seeds, potentially playing in the first round in Seattle and then meeting up in a Pac-12 legacy battle in the second round in the city of Seattle. It's a much shorter flight than going all the way to play in Lexington or Wichita or Cleveland. UCLA is comfortable with going to Seattle because they've done that. That's easy, LAX to Seattle. Okay, they can handle that. Which is why you beat Michigan State, Oregon, one of the two, and that can help UCLA. Now, Mick Cronin said something interesting the other night after the USC game. He wants to implement a William Kyle and a Aday Mara lineup, and they just haven't had time to practice it. Mara was a little slow injury-wise. Kyle didn't initially crack the lineup. And now 2 guys who are battling for minutes, almost against each other, right? William Kyle's best game came before Aday Mara broke out this last week plus against Iowa, Wisconsin, Washington, and now USC. Has continued to battle and battle and battle. And you put those two together, you get a little bit of a liability on offense, a little bit of a liability on defense, but those two on the court, Mata can use his length to force players to come backdoor, and that's where William Kyle can have chase down backdoor blocks covering Mata's back. And then Mata will draw so much attention that if he's on the court, I would think that a backdoor pass, Mata's passing ability that Cronin has raved about for 2 years now, could leave Kyle open for one-on-one dunks and posters or more shooting on the outside. I just wonder if Cronin does go to the Mata-Kyle lineup, how does that shift with Bilodeau and with Daly? And do Bilodeau and Daly, when Bilodeau's healthy, play with Mata consistently? Is that the 3-4-5, Daly at the 3, Bilodeau at the 4, Mata at the 5, and then you play Kobe at the 2, Clark or Andrews at the 1? That means you're losing Clark, you're losing Mack, you're losing a lot of players potentially if you go big, and definitely not your strongest defensive lineup when you have to have Kobe Johnson cover for a lot. I wonder where that is going to shift. But I think Cronin wants to learn how to go big, might test it out with a day or two of practice heading into Oregon because Biddle is so dominant for Oregon, the 7-footer. And I think he really wants to use it to put it against Michigan State and try to dominate them in the paint or just not get eaten alive in the rebounding second chance points and points in the paint. Because Michigan State would be an absolutely huge win for UCLA. These next 2 games can shift the Bruins from a 10 seed, a 7 or 8 seed, or put them into a 4 or 5 seed contending for the top 3 in the Big Ten in the regular season and contending for a top 4 seed much closer to home. This next couple of games are huge. And of course, you don't want to drop that game to Penn State, who is scrappy and had Michigan beat on the road, basically, with a missed foul call and a Michigan buzzer beater practically at the end of the game in Ann Arbor. A lot of things to work out for the Bruins. Bruins have figured out how to use Mata. Now, how does Cronin, when the lineup's fully healthy, construct it to be successful with Mata and Bilodeau and Daly? Or does he split the lineup and you got your first 5, your second 5, and when Mata's out, that's when we see the smaller lineup go to work against the other team's bigs? All confounding questions with Cronin wanting to go with 2 bigs and learning how to do that with his best players recovering from injury and how to utilize them best. All in a situation now that UCLA needs to win games to not have to travel so far. Can't wait. Can't wait. We'll talk next Locked On UCLA episode. More recruiting, more pregame tips for UCLA, Oregon, and will that big lineup actually work? All about that and more. Coming up next. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.